The Texas Stars edged the Tucson Roadrunners 5-4 in overtime Monday night to take a 2-1 series lead in the second round of the AHL's Calder Cup playoffs. It was the Stars' third goal, scored by Brian Flynn, that was the most unique of the evening. The sequence leading to his all-leading sixth goal of the postseason can only be described as eventful. So let's go through all of this. NBC's Stanley Cup playoff hub Roope Hintz zooms through the neutral zone between two Roadrunners players, who then proceed to collide with one another. Hintz then attempts to dump the puck into the opposite corner, but instead it goes off of Tucson defenseman Dakota Murma's face. Flynn then seizes the opportunity and pounces on the loose puck and beats Adin Hill on his second attempt. Just how they drew it up. Murma summed it up pretty perfectly afterward. "Certainly that was one of the most bizarre goals that's happened," he told the Arizona Daily Star, "but that's playoff hockey and that's the bounces that happen." Sean Leahy is a writer for Pro Hockey Talk on NBC Sports. Drop him a line at pitblog@NBCSports.com or follow him on Twitter at Sean Leahy. Taylor Hall had a remarkable 2017-18 season for the New Jersey Devils, as he accumulated 39 goals and 93 points in 76 games. That's even more impressive when you consider that he suffered a serious hand injury in December that eventually required surgery. On Tuesday morning, the Devils provided medical updates on Hall, goalie Corey Schneider and forward Patrick Maroon. NBC's Stanley Cup playoff hub Hall underwent surgery on April 30 to repair torn ligaments in his left hand. The injury kept him out of the lineup for 3 games between Jan. 22 to 25. The 26-year-old is expected to be ready for the start of training camp in September, which is a huge relief for the Devils. Schneider battled groin, lower body injuries all season, and he underwent surgery last Tuesday to repair torn cartilage in his left hip. His recovery is expected to keep him on the shelf for 5 months, which would put him on track to be ready for early October. That means there's a chance he could miss a good chunk of training camp. As for Maroon, who was acquired from the Edmonton Oilers before the trade deadline, he had to repair a herniated disc in his back. The operation took place last Wednesday. The pending unrestricted free agent is expected to make a full recovery before the start of training camp. It'll be interesting to see if the Devils are willing to bring him back into the fold next year. Joey Alfieri is a writer for Pro Hockey Talk on NBC Sports. Drop him a line at pitblog@NBCSports.com or follow him on Twitter at Joey Alfieri. Rod Brind'Amour told the News and Observer last month that his learning capacity as an assistant coach had maxed out and he was ready for the next step to become an NHL head coach. After working with 2 Carolina Hurricanes head coaches since 2012, Brind'Amour will finally get that shot. The Hurricanes announced on Tuesday that Brind'Amour will be their new head coach. It continues the off-season of change in Carolina that saw Bill Peters leave for the Calgary Flames and Ron Francis get fired from his job as president of hockey operations and replaced by longtime NHL executive Rick Dudley. Also in the press release was the little nugget that Don Waddell, who had been serving as interim general manager since Francis was canned, has the role full-time now as well as the title of president. Rod is the greatest leader in the history of this franchise, and has earned the opportunity to take charge of our locker room, said Waddell in a statement. "We spoke to a number of candidates for this position, but our conversations with staff and players consistently returned to the same person. Rod's fresh ideas, ability to motivate and understanding of what it takes to bring a championship to Raleigh will help our young team take the next step toward competing to bring the cup back to North Carolina." NBC's Stanley Cup playoff hub, "If you never try, you'll never know," Brind'Amour said last month. "The reason for saying, 'why not,' is I've been doing it for 8 years and I really believe I can help out one way or the other and see if I can put us over the hump." Brind'Amour, 47, spent parts of 10 seasons playing for the Hurricanes and captained them beginning with the 2005-06 season, which ended with the franchise winning its first and only Stanley Cup. Once retired, he also worked in player development with the team. For Tom Dundon, these are safe picks. There's familiarity with the organization and the fact that both are on board with the overhaul the new owner is overseeing. But are they the right ones for the current state of the franchise? The Hurricanes have not made the playoffs since 2010. After coming up short the last few seasons as many thought they would take big steps forward, change was definitely needed. So out goes Francis and Peters and talk of a new identity and culture bubbles up. A fresh start was on the horizon, but then Dudley, who is longtime buddies with the new GM, is hired. Now you have Brind'Amour, who has been on the non-playing side of the franchise's failures for nearly the last decade, is promoted. If you're trying to establish a new identity, then why are you holding on to pieces of the past? You now have a franchise legend behind the bench on a team that has continually disappointed. You now have a GM who hasn't served as a GM since 2011 when the Atlanta Thrashers were still around. The Metropolitan Division isn't exactly getting any easier. The approach to free agency and fixing the holes on the roster will be fascinating. This has to work now. Sean Leahy is a writer for Pro Hockey Talk on NBC Sports. Drop him a line at pitblog@nbcsports.com or follow him on Twitter at Sean. After a 0-3 start at the 2018 World Hockey Championship, the Belarusian Ice Hockey Federation has decided to make a coaching change mid-tournament. Former Red Wings and Bruins head coach Dave Lewis is out. He'll be replaced by Sergei Pushkov, who was serving as Lewis' assistant. Of course, the team is calling this a mutual decision, but is it ever? It's easy to see why the Federation wasn't thrilled about the country's start at this year's Worlds. They opened the tournament with 3 ugly losses to Sweden, 5-0, France, 6-2, and Russia, 6-0. Getting blown out by Sweden and Russia isn't acceptable, but it's understandable. Losing to France by 4 goals is a different story. NBC's Stanley Cup playoff hub, even though they're a long shot to qualify for the quarters, they can still avoid relegation to Division 1 if they turn things around before the end of the tournament. The last-place team in each division gets relegated. They have 4 games to pull themselves out of this hole, as they'll take on Switzerland, the Czech Republic, Austria and Slovakia. Lewis had been the head coach of the Belarusian hockey team since December 0 2014. He's coached them at each of the last 4 World Hockey Championships. They made it to the quarterfinal in 2015. They lost to Canada 9-0, but failed to get out of the round-robin portion of the tournament in 2016 and 2017. It'll be interesting to see where the 64-year-old goes from here. He hasn't had an NHL job since he was let go by the Hurricanes in 2013-14. Could this be the end of the line for him? Joey Alfieri is a writer for Pro Hockey Talk on NBC Sports. Drop him a line at pitblog@nbcsports.com or follow him on Twitter at Joey Alfieri. Welcome to the PHT Morning Skate, a collection of links from around the hockey world. Have a link you want to submit? Email us at pitblog@nbcsports.com. The Capitals and Predators both came up with huge wins last night, so TSN's Scott Cullen took a deeper look at the key numbers for each team. TSN.ca, sportsbooks in Vegas may not have seen the Golden Knights' success coming, but they've embraced the position they're in. The Golden Knights have hit the jackpot with different players and it could result in a Stanley Cup. Sporting news, the Tampa Bay Lightning have taken down the New Jersey Devils and Boston Bruins to make it to the Eastern Conference Final. USA Today looks at 5 reasons why the Bolts can go all the way. USA Today, the Bruins are going to be watching the rest of the playoffs from home for a few reasons. First, they simply didn't do enough at 5-on-5. NHL.com, if you're not Tampa, Boston or Toronto, the Atlantic Division will be a brutal place to play for the next few years. All 3 of those teams are clearly ahead of the rest right now. Sportsnet, last year, the Sharks said goodbye to Patrick Marleau. Is it time to do the same with veteran Joe Thornton, who will become an unrestricted free agent in July? Mercury News, not only do the Golden Knights have incredible players on their top lines, but they've also built up a solid group of depth players that have helped them reach this point. Las Vegas Sun, Penguins fans may still have fresh wounds from last night's playoff exit, but it's time to analyze why they failed to get by Washington. The Pittsburgh Tribune looks at the 3 reasons why they were eliminated. Pittsburgh Tribune, even though the Rangers have said that they're going to be retooling, former NHL coach Dan Bylsma isn't buying it. New York Post, former Islanders GM Bill Torrey passed away last week, so Newsday decided to look back at the top 10 moves he made during his tenure in Long Island. Bringing a guy like Dennis Potvin into the organization was a home run. Newsday, up top, check out the highlights from last night's game between the Jets and Predators. Joey Alfieri is a writer for Pro Hockey Talk on NBC Sports. Drop him a line at pitblog@nbcsports.com or follow him on Twitter at Joey Alfieri.